Hello everyone. In this lesson we're going to start working on our generic heading block. Let's jump right into the action. So in our previous lesson we set up this basic banner block. Now we want to create a new custom block that you can nest inside the banner. So to get started I want us to jump in to our functions.php file. In functions.php, scroll down to the very bottom. So remember, this is where we wrote the code that registered our banner block. Well, in this chapter, we're going to create a lot of custom blocks, and we don't want to have to repeat this code for each block, right? That would get super repetitive. So what I like to do is create a reusable PHP class, and then we can just leverage it once for each block that we want to register. So here's what I would do. Maybe at the very bottom, let's add a new line of code and let's say class, and you can make up any name you want. I'm going to make up a name of JSX block. Curly brackets. Within our class here, let's have a function with the very specific name of __ construct. Parentheses, curly brackets. We want to use this exact name because PHP will look for a method or function with this name when you create a new object from this class. So for example, below all of this class code, at the very bottom, now we could say something like, we want a new instance of JSX block, semicolon. Now in these parentheses, when we're instantiating a new JSX block instance, you can just give it a value. So let's give it a string of text called banner. Okay, and then right below that line, imagine we would also say we want a new instance of JSX block, call that, give it a string value of quotes, maybe generic heading. Okay, and then the idea is this is really the only value that would be dynamic. So if we think about this code that we don't want to repeat over and over, really the only thing that's going to change or be dynamic is the name of our JavaScript file, the name of our block, right? The value that we're providing here. So now let's just build out our class. So first of all, in our construct function, within these parentheses, let's have a parameter and name it $name. Okay. Then in our construct function, let's have a property where we store that value so that we can access it from any method in the class. So $this, arrow symbol, so dash greater than, let's call it name, equals, and then just pull in this value. So $name. Semicolon. On a new line, let's now add an action. So add action. So A, B. The event that we want to hook onto is init. And then what function do we want to call? Well, we haven't created this method yet, but we can create it in about 10 seconds from now. So instead of the B placeholder, quotes, let's make up a name of onInit. Cool. Now within our class, but below this construct function, so right here, let's just create a function with that name. So function onInit, parentheses, curly brackets. And now we can just borrow all of this code. So up in our banner block function, the code that we don't want to repeat over and over, start selecting from WP register script down to the 3 lines of code for register block type. Just copy those lines. In onInit, just paste it in. Okay, and now really all we need to do is hollow out the names so that they're not specific, and instead use whatever value was passed into our class. So that's this $name, or actually we made it available from this property. So for example, on WP register script, let's get rid of this hard-coded name that's specific to a banner. So instead for that first argument, it would just be $this, arrow symbol, name. Okay, then if we scroll over a little bit to the right, we wouldn't want a hard code to load banner.js. We would want this to be, the wildcard variable name .js. Now there are 100 different ways that you could work with concatenating the text together, but here's what I would do. If we use double quotes for this little bit of text instead of single quotes, so I just swapped those to double quotes, well, now we can do this. Wrap the word banner, the part that we want to hollow out, wrap that in curly brackets, and then in the curly brackets, hollow that out. And now we can just say $this, arrow symbol, name. Cool. Let's keep hollowing out the next few lines of code. So our block theme, that's always going to be our namespace, but we don't want to hard code this to banner. So just do the same thing. Because these are using double quotes, I'm just going to get rid of banner, curly brackets, $ this arrow symbol name. Let's do the same thing here. We don't need to worry about concatenating anything here, so we don't need quotes at all. We can literally just pull in $ this arrow symbol name. Cool. At this point, to test this out, here's what we're going to do. Scroll up a little bit, and I want you to just completely delete all of our banner block code. So get rid of the entire banner block function, get rid of this line where we said add action init banner block. Cool. So now we just have our reusable class, and then we're leveraging it. One last detail before we save this file, I did lead you astray on this line of code. This is not the correct syntax to point to and execute a method. So for this second argument here, when we're saying add action init, hollow out that second argument. Instead, we give it an array, so square brackets, we give it a comma b. The first thing you give it is the object or the class itself, so $ this. And then the second thing you give it is quotes, the name of the method, so on init. You might remember we used this syntax over and over again in our plugin development chapter. Anyways, to test this out, to make sure it's working, let's just give it a save. And then back in the template editor screen, if we refresh, perfect. You'll know that you wrote that PHP correctly if your banner block still exists and it's still working. Cool. So at this point, remember we also leveraged this same class for generic heading. So now we can just go create a JavaScript file with this name, and that's really all we need to do. So check this out. In our sidebar, in the Our Blocks folder, just create a new file, name it genericheading.js, right? Or whatever you chose here as your value. Hopefully you're following along with me just so we stay on the same page, but generic heading, genericheading.js. In order to save a bit of typing, why don't we just borrow the contents of banner.js? So just select everything in banner, copy it, paste it into the new empty generic heading, and now let's just hollow it out a bit. So we're not going to need inner blocks up here at the very top. Next, let's customize the block name. So we want the same namespace, but instead of /banner, this would be /generic heading. Let's change the title value, generic heading. For the edit component, we definitely don't need this use me later constant, so we can get rid of that. In terms of what we want to return, well, for now, let's just have a div that says hello. So div hello. In terms of what we want to save, well, again, just for a quick test to make sure that everything's working, let's just return a div or a paragraph, doesn't really matter, that says this is our heading block. Let's give that a save, and now to truly test this out, we do need to adjust our package.json file. So right now, jump into package.json. On this start task, we just want to point towards that new generic heading JavaScript file. You can tell the WordPress package to use as many files as you want as an entry point. So at the end of this line, let's just add on a space and say, also look in the Our Blocks folder / for generic heading.js. That's all we need to do. If we give that a save and then just start up that task. So npm run start. Cool. So now back on the template screen, refresh. We won't be able to add it to our banner yet because remember it's restricting which blocks you're allowed to add, but if you try to add it outside of the banner block for now, so add block, and if I start searching for generic, there it is, generic heading, we see the word hello. If we save it and then look at the front end, we should see that bit of placeholder text. Yep, this is our heading block. Cool. So now all we need to do is adjust our banner block to only allow our custom block type of generic heading. So do this with me. Within our blocks folder, jump into banner.js. Down. For me, it's around line number 27, but we see inner blocks, allowed blocks equals, and then it's an array. Well, just hollow out the array. And for now, we just want one value of quotes. And then remember, our namespace is our block theme / generic heading. That's the only block type we want to allow for now. In the future, we can add more. But if we give that a save, and then go back into the template editor and refresh, If we try to add a new block in the banner, it only lets us add that generic heading. Why don't we give ourselves a clean slate? So if you just click anywhere on the banner itself and then hit the backspace key on your keyboard, and then I'll also delete this generic headline here. But now the point is, if we start fresh and add in our banner block, let me search for banner, there it is. Okay, and then if you try to add a piece of content into the empty banner block, you can see if you even hover over, the only option here is add generic heading. Cool. In our next lesson, we'll actually start building out the generic heading block type. For this lesson, I really just wanted to get the repetitive PHP solution out of the way. Let me go ahead and save this template. Also, one final detail, totally optional, but back in, for example, banner.js up at the very top, remember we used this import syntax. If you wanted to, you could use this import syntax for the register block type function as well. So for example, you don't have to do this, but you could say import curly brackets and look for register block type from, and the package name would be @WordPress/blocks, right? And then on this line of code, you wouldn't need the wp.blocks. Get rid of that. It would literally just be using this directly. If you wanted to, you could do the same thing in our generic heading JS file. So I would just copy this line of code up at the top of generic heading, just paste it in, and then you can get rid of the wp.blocks. Just like this. If we give that a save, and I'll also save banner.js, we can go test it out. So if we refresh our template edit screen, cool, everything still works wonderfully. It's going to bring this quick lesson to a close. In our next lesson, we're going to learn how to turn this into a rich text field that not only looks stylistically exactly like our fictional university headlines, but that also takes advantage of the WordPress bold and italic icons. In other words, it will look like our custom headline, but it will behave just like a native rich text WordPress block editor field. Let's keep our momentum rolling, and I'll see you then.